everyone, it's Philippa Wraithmel and welcome back to the EdTech podcast. Before we dive in today, I'm really proud to say that this episode is sponsored by Hachette Learning, and they are doing something I care deeply about, making professional learning for teachers flexible, research-based and genuinely helpful. Through Hachette Learning Academy, they offer short, competency-based adaptive courses that fit around teachers' real lives. And while still aligning with national and international competency frameworks, it's something that we all need. So we're really proud to be partnering with them for this series. Today, I am joined by someone who embodies the same commitment to equality and challenge in the classroom, Morgan Whitfield. Morgan is an author and senior leader who's taught in British curriculum schools in the UK, UAE for 12 years, and now Vietnam. Across all those contexts, she's been relentlessly championing for equality and equity, asking some brave questions about who gets challenged, who gets labelled, and who gets left out. In this episode, we talk about her book, Gifted, the shift to enrichment, challenge, and equity, and her new teaching course with Hachette Learning Academy. We're going to dig into why the language of high ability and low ability can quietly box students in. Learn how one student changed the way Morgan thought about giftedness, the difference between ability, attainment, and capacity, and how adaptive teaching, one high bar, many scaffolds, can create real challenge for every learner, not just the top 2%. It's a conversation about mindset, data, belonging, and seeing who our students are far more than a single score. So let's jump in. Hi and welcome, Morgan Whitfield, to the EdTech podcast. Can you start by please introducing yourself to our global audience and telling us a little bit about your background in education?
Philippa, thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to be here. I am an author. I am a senior leader. I have taught in British curriculum schools for years. I have taught in the UK, 12 years in the United Arab Emirates, and right now I am in Vietnam. I've held various roles, but my favorite role is something that I'm really passionate about, which is always a champion for equity, which is what a lot of my books have to do about, which is what the course that I've done for Hachette Learning is about, all about how we can challenge every single learner.
That is amazing. And I think that is the heart of what education should be, isn't it? Just making sure that every child is pushing themselves to be the best possible and having us educators as champions for that. So you talk a little bit about the books that you've written. So how did your first idea come about? What was it that made you want to write this book? And tell us the titles and things like this around your book too.
Yeah, so my book, the book that came out in 2024 is Gifted with a huge question mark. So Gifted, the shift to enrichment, challenge, and equity. And the reason it's a huge question mark is I really want to emphasize and underline the fact that giftedness is something that we think has gone away and disappeared, when in fact it is very much present and exists in the structures that we have in schools today. My latest course that I've done for Hachette Learning is on adaptive teaching, which is very much in line with the idea that we should be responsive and respond to the individual needs of students, which is something that I talk about a lot in my book. So they're very much connected, this idea of challenging every learner from whatever starting point they are at.
Amazing. And I have to say, I love the cover. It's so powerful. And it wouldn't shout to me as being like necessarily an education book. So I think it really draws people in that way as well, which is fantastic. So you talk about, meeting learners where they are, finding out the individuality of them. So give us a little bit of insight into that. What are the sorts of things that you discuss in your book to help others to understand how to do that?
I think it's really interesting. One of the reasons that I wrote the book was it started with one student. So one student in one class. And his name was Luca. And I remember the very first lesson that I had with him in geography, he sat down and he was so excited about the subject. He was literally bouncing out of his seat. He would raise his hand constantly. He had been studying things about climate change all summer and was so proud to share it. And his enthusiasm was just contagious. It felt like he had ignited curiosity in the entire class. And after that lesson, I looked up Luca to see where he was. I looked at his past exam results. I looked at his previous reports. I looked at his standardized data. And he was a middling student who was noted for having behavior difficulties. He was not someone who would ever be flagged as gifted, which is something that my school had at the time. Giftedness was something that you would target students as a strategy for challenge. And it seemed very exclusive. And I began to question this because Luca was definitely a student who would never be identified as having high ability. But he very much was someone who could benefit from challenge. So Luca was kind of the beginning of that journey. And then I had one other conversation with a teacher friend, a colleague, about a week later. And she was saying that their school had recently put together a really great program for what she called their high ability, high aptitude learners. And she had given them this name, and this is what the school had titled what they thought were the students who needed the most challenge. And they had developed this incredible program where these students would be working on a special STEM project to design facilities for their auditorium. It was really amazing. And we were talking about how to best build this program, how to develop it. But then I remember looking at her and saying, well, how come you just have these students involved with it? And how have you selected them? And she said, well, we just look at their cognitive ability testing and we take the top 2%. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is such a great opportunity that so many kids are not being selected for. And there's something about that exclusivity that just didn't sit right. So how do we create programs that are truly inclusive? And how do we at the same time make sure that challenge is there and present in every single lesson? So both in and out of the classroom, I wanted to look at equity, challenge, and enrichment.
That is amazing. And fundamentally, looking at a child's cognitive ability is far greater than being able to look at anything that they do situationally within, that 1 hour of the day that they may have felt stressed, or they might have felt a little bit anxious, or they might have, had all sorts of things going on. We know how diverse our children are that sit in front of us every single day is different. So that ability actually allows you to also then make that change. So, we know that cognitive ability is also progressive. So that can change, and that allows more children to potentially be in that 2% eventually, maybe even offering it up to children when they are being pushed a little bit further.
I think it's really interesting. So I've played with this word a lot. I think that the term high ability is something that has been embraced by education. And we've said, well, we've given up giftedness because that is elitist and exclusive, and it's something that belongs to the past. It's antiquated. But then instead, we replaced it with this idea of differentiation, where we have kids stratified into low, middle, and high ability. And students aren't like that. And ability is not a stagnant state. In fact, the word ability itself seems fixed in an age of growth mindset. So what we really mean when we talk about ability is we're talking about something that we think a student has, which is potential. So we might say that they're under or achieving to their level. What you want to do when you break down ability is you want to actually refer to what we mean as teachers, which is attainment. A student in my classroom at this time is high attaining or low attaining in this specific topic in this moment. And that is very changeable. I think instead of the word ability, what we mean and what we are truly referring to is capacity. And a school that I've worked at in the past, I had one of the senior leaders say, we don't use the word ability in our school. The word ability, it actually says something about our students that we don't want to imply, which is that they are weak or strong, more able, less able. And these aren't useful words for us to use when describing students. Instead of using the word ability, we say attainment, because that is exactly where a student is at. And I can use that as a springboard with scaffolds to get them where they can be. So looking at using attainment as opposed to ability, and looking at capacity as something that we as teachers can build every single day.
Do you think, though, that when we look at attainment, and if we think about cognitive ability testing, where that can be far greater. So I know when I did my NPQSL, for instance, I actually looked at those middle ability learners, or ability as we've just talked about, and where they were And actually their potential was much greater. And the work that we did with those students was to identify that because they have the potential, what we're doing is looking and going, oh, well, but they're where they should be. But actually they weren't, because they had greater potential if given the opportunity. And so I wonder how that marries up as well, because are we using attainment in schools then, but then perhaps because people are doing okay, they're doing well, they're doing national average, but we're not looking at where they could be? How does that link in with your gifted and equity?
I think that is fascinating, because the way that we use data and data structures in schools is really strange, because we have structurally made data something that's really important. And we talk about being data driven all the time. And we tend to use cognitive ability testing as this way to say this is a child's potential. But cognitive ability testing, or using one standardized test score, is really dangerous in of itself. And that doesn't mean that I don't love it. I love data. I think it's amazing. It's insightful. It gives us power. But I think what's amazing is that we kind of are reductionist, and a lot of the times in the way that we use data. So something like middle ability, what we've done there is we've taken a standardized assessment score and we've reduced a child to one number. And that one number tells us where they lie on a continuum of ability in comparison with either their peers in that school or nationally or internationally. That's not that useful at all. But when I look at a cognitive ability test and I see the different batteries, so I can see where they are in terms of their verbal reasoning, their nonverbal, their spatial reasoning, and I can look at peaks and troughs in those batteries, that tells me something useful. That can inform my teaching strategies. That can flag something in terms of a learning variable that a child might have. So it might be that they process information differently, or it might speak to the fact that they are a multilingual learner. So the language that we use around ability, we have to be quite careful. And what's fascinating is when we look at companies that provide cognitive ability testing, they are very explicit in saying, do not use a reductionist score. The wealth is in the full reports that we give you and the teaching strategies you can derive from the depth of this data, not by using one score and saying +1 means that you are doing value add as a teacher. We are so much more than that, and these kids are so much more than that. We have to give students the full capacity to shine. We need to take the lid off learning. There's something really, really powerful about harnessing data and using it in a way that doesn't box kids into one size fits all learning.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that last bit more. Everything that you just said then as well is just so vital and important for every teacher to understand. But that's specifically about not boxing them in. And I think that leads us really nicely back to the book. So I think what are the sort of main core themes that you would describe your book as sharing with educators around?
Well, I think I divided the book into 3 sections. So the first section is all about the idea of challenge. So when we look at challenge and how we can embed challenge every single day in our lessons, I look at curriculum, which is what we teach and how we can make sure that there's challenge in our curriculum. I look at pedagogy, which is how we teach. So how we interact with students every single day and how we change our strategies for our students to make sure that we are making the most of our time with them so that we can maximize learning. And then the third thing that I look at is mindset. So mindset and challenge is really interesting because it touches upon what we just discussed, which is the idea that a mindset of what the teacher has a tremendous impact on the trajectory of learning for a student. So we all know that there are famous studies that have been done. Jacobson and Rosenshall have done a study back in 1968 that saw that teachers who perceived their students to be intellectual bloomers, those students made greater progress. And it was because it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Teachers believed those students were high ability, so they treated them as such, and they treated them with the academic rigor the discipline. They reinforced positive stereotypes. They gave these students chances to be resilient and have grit. All those things that we say is great for challenge. And because they treated them differently, those students flourished. When we look at a study by Good and Brophy in 1985, we found the opposite was true. Students that were perceived as low attaining students were sat at the back of the classroom, received less feedback, felt less warmth and rapport from teachers. So, which is really, really sad. So it is something about mindset and unpacking those biases that we come with as teachers. And it's built into our teacher training. We're taught to differentiate as opposed to be adaptive. So we're taught right at the very beginning, I pitch my lessons, pitch them at middle ability, and then I do something different for high ability and something different for low ability. And what we tend to do with that difference is we dilute resources. We create 3 different learning objectives. So some students are expected to learn less than others. We create tiered worksheets, which is a huge workload burden for teachers. And that kind of says, I expect less from you. So to the student who's sitting at the table that gets a different worksheet, it says, I don't expect you to handle the complexity of this problem. And those are subliminal messages that students definitely receive. We have to change our mindset so that they receive the other message. Everything is worth a go. You can handle complexity, novelty. You should be able to explore this topic with its full richness. So yes, I think that mindset is a huge, huge driver. And then I spend the rest of the book looking at how we can enrich outside the classroom and this connection to equity, because equity is really foundational. And again, this drives our mindset as teachers. Equity is something that we want because education is fundamentally something that can change entire societies, that can change the direction of the future. And this is something that we as teachers, we need to know and understand the issues of equity and how that can be unpacked and used in our classroom for the better.
Hachette Learning Academy is a growing suite of interactive online CPD courses powered by adaptive technology, designed to bring the benefits of one-to-one coaching to every teacher. The Academy offers flexible, personalised professional learning that fits around busy schedules. Each course is built around a competency framework aligned with international teaching standards, helping educators strengthen the skills that drive effective teaching and lasting career growth. For more information, just visit www.hachetteLearning.com/academy.
That's amazing. And I think it's really interesting. Part of me wants to say, why did you leave mindset to part 3? But I guess the normal narrative would be, well, we're setting the foundations and strategy of the book and the why and the reasoning and like you say, the pedagogy. But that mindset is a really interesting thing because, as you say, teachers are being taught this. We're being taught in this way through PGCEs, through NQTs, through all these different things, early qualified teachers. How does your book, or even perhaps your course, try to address these mindset changes? What sorts of things are you trying to encourage teachers to kind of become more ritualistic around?
Well, I think my course looks a lot at this specifically. So one of the things that we saw a few years ago was that the early careers framework in the UK changed so that we removed the word differentiation entirely, and we've replaced that with adaptive teaching. And that came out of things like the PISA report, which showed that when teachers were adaptive, students made a lot more progress in subjects like science. We started to explore that a little bit more. And I think what's really important is the word differentiation has been removed, but we shouldn't look at it antagonistically. Differentiation had this incredibly noble intention. The idea behind differentiation was that we should have resources to reach every single child in the classroom. We should make sure that there is a scaffold available for a child when they need it. We want to make sure that students find learning accessible, that the learning environment itself is holistic and inclusive. So differentiation is absolutely wonderful. The problem was that it was misapplied, and we misapplied it in those ways that I alluded to before. We started doing things like some can, most can, all can. And
I laughed because it was for everybody. In your PGC, it was all, most, some.
Exactly.
Could, would, should.
And that's a really dangerous thing to start doing, because what we do is we then set students off on a pathway where gaps in understanding naturally widen and gaps in prior knowledge widen, because we are consistently saying, you don't need to learn as much, or I'm going to water down this text, or I'm going to make sure that the skill that you learn is simpler. I'm not going to push you as hard when we do these tiered expectations, when we lower expectations. And that's not what the purpose of differentiation is. What we want to do instead, and this is what adaptive teaching really reinforces, is the idea that we have one high bar. And in my course, I really look at having one high, ambitious learning intention for every single student in the classroom. Having that one high bar means that there's an overarching learning intention that has lots of challenge in it, and that it's accessible to everyone, because in that moment of adaptive teaching, I'm providing scaffolds so that every single student has a ladder that they can climb, or they can skip rungs to get to that one high bar. So that is the idea of adaptive teaching. Not that we are taking away anything, but that we are adding a lot more to our teaching in terms of being responsive in the moment. We're not spending time fighting a photocopier to do 3 different versions of a lesson or 25 different versions of a lesson in one lesson. Instead, we are responding in the moment to students. And that is much more powerful, because in doing that, we build so much more rapport with students and understanding of what they actually need.
Absolutely. It links right back to belonging and people feeling that they understand you. So you get more of a connection, you build more of a relationship with your teacher, and hopefully also build more of a passion for that child within that subject area, because they feel more understood. I think that's such a lovely way of going around it. And I think there's that whole teach to the top method, isn't there, of Tom Sherrington speaks around it a lot, of actually that is exactly where we should be doing. And being able to make sure we have high expectations of everyone. I think it's actually one of, isn't it, the first teaching standard is high expectations of all children and young people. And so I guess when we think around that, how would you hope that your book plays a part within change, within potential policy, within training? Obviously, this is a training course through Hachette Learning. Do you hope that this will be also recognised and seen by more teachers across the world, so that they can actually build this into their professional development?
Yes. I think that there is such power in kind of, again, unpacking some of the words that we use, because, again, they are built into how we are taught to be teachers. They are built into some of our CPDs. And I think now we're at a point in education where we are deconstructing that. And we're saying, well, what is the true purpose? If our first expectation of teachers is to make sure that every single student has high expectations, how do we do that in every moment that we are in a lesson? It's interesting. The other day, I received a message on LinkedIn from a senior leader who said, we're going to be inspected soon. And we know that the inspectors want to see differentiation. We want to embrace adaptive teaching. They want to see that we have stratified our students into ability levels and that we have a gifted and talented register. How do we explain that this is not something that we do at our school? And I think that's really key. We as teachers actually have more voice and agency than we think that we do. We have to push back sometimes to say we know what the best pedagogy is because we know our students and we're being responsive to it. We have structures in education that aren't changing at the same pace, but equity is really important. So we as teachers actually have more platform to demand that these structures, that policy actually catches up to where we are at in terms of educational research and what we do in our practice on the ground every single day. I think it's powerful to remember that we have that voice and to speak to that when we come up against these structures every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such good advice, because we have so many schools around the world that are trying to do things a little bit differently, because ultimately they know their students best, right? They know what they need and they know what they're going to benefit from. And that should be the professional judgment of that environment. Absolutely. I want to ask you, just throughout your writing of the book, now I remember you going off and hiding away in rooms away from all of your gorgeous children. Was there anything in terms of your perspective as an educator, as you did all of your research, all of your writing, that changed throughout the book?
That is so funny you should mention that. So after the book was published, my own son, I think it's one of those things, I didn't see something that was right in front of me. I published the book. I was working on the course on adaptive teaching, and I got called into a meeting with my son's teacher who said, Stafford seems to learn in a very different way. Do you mind if we do an investigation and kind of explore what that might mean? So we went off and we started doing interviews. We started having Stafford being diagnosed and seeing his journey, and seeing what I thought was just a regular plateau in his learning, because I noticed things like he read voraciously. He would read, but he didn't like writing at all. He would get distracted easily, and he wouldn't want to write down anything when it came to maths. But then when I asked him, his mental maths was so incredibly sharp and accurate. It was faster than me. So what we saw were those peaks and troughs and data that revealed something really interesting about my own child. So what I discovered through this process of going through this journey as a parent, as opposed to a teacher, made me more fully understand just how important it is that we identify and that we nurture our children in a way that is truly inclusive. My son is so proud that he learns differently. He calls it his superpower. And his diagnoses are interesting labels, but we don't really use them. We talk about how he has a special brain. And I think that framing is something that has become really important to us as a family and really important to me as a practitioner and a teacher. So yeah, my own personal journey, I had all the research in the world, but it was the personal experience that has really driven this home.
That's amazing. And it's just so vital, isn't it, though, seeing them from different lenses, and it's wonderful that you got the opportunity, and also that you know that he is able to feel that way as well, because I think when we look at our children who have superpowers, it's really important that that is the narrative, and that also comes through the mindset change of teachers as well, which comes back to earlier points that we've discussed, because a negative connotation of any of those can be very difficult for children to then live with and deal with, and it's then their own narrative that they have to come out of the other side of it. So that's really important, and it's amazing that he's being so empowered. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. To come to a couple of final questions, I guess in terms of your course, if I'm a teacher and I'm preparing to go on to my adaptive learning course by Morgan Whitfield, what should I expect? What are the things that you would like to what should I feel like I'm going to be able to take away from the course?
Well, I believe that a course is useful when you can use it the next day, when you can immediately say, here are 23 practical strategies that I can use tomorrow that will improve my practice or at least frame things differently. So the course is action-packed. A lot of my books tend to be about theory and research. And what I know is that teachers want to take away, well, now that I have this mindset shift, that's wonderful. How do I deploy strategies that will put this into action? And that is exactly what the book is, and exactly what the course is. So the course looks at all these little adjustments that we can make to be adaptive teachers. It looks at different types of scaffolds. It looks at how we can use writing frames, how we can use gallery critiques, how we can use peer collaboration, how we can use oracy, how we can use that verbal rehearsal, all of these different techniques to make adaptive teaching come alive in a classroom. So that is the number one thing that I think is important, that teachers walk away with the toolbox.
And that's amazing, because I think that's exactly what all teachers want as well, which sounds to me like you've got the perfect kind of complement there of like practical action strategies, people to really be able to immerse themselves in, but then almost like going back to the book to go, Let me have a little bit more of a delve into that theory. Let me have a little bit more of a look. Let me remind myself of the change theory, all those elements as well. That you've kind of got a perfect partnership there. Sounds amazing. So I guess one last thing would be to say, if you could summarize your book in a sentence or a couple of sentences, because it might be hard, what would you say? How would you share it with our listeners?
Okay. My book is about light bulb moments. My book is about how we engage children so that they are excited to explore more about learning. My book is about how we can stop seeing education as a mountain that students climb to reach a single peak, that they all go up the same path, one after another, to reach the end. And instead, we start to look at learning as an ocean. And that ocean is endless. We can swim close to shore. We can go into the harbors. We can go deep into the sea and dive down. And I think it's that depth that we find so interesting. So that is how I want to change our perspective on learning as kind of endless possibility.
That's incredible. I love that vision. I can sort of see that huge sea and all these ports and things and, big lighthouses everywhere and the deep depths of the ocean. That's amazing. Very visual person. It was absolutely delightful to speak to you, Morgan. Thank you so much for being here. Please do share with the audience just where they can get your book and anything else that we might need to know.
You can get my book from Hachette Learning. It's available on Kindle and Amazon. You can get my course from Hachette Learning Academy, Adaptive Teaching. The book is called Gifted, The Shift to Enrichment, Challenge, and Equity. And if you want to reach me, I'm easily reachable on social media, and I love engaging with all teachers.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, Morgan.
Thank you, Philippa, for having me.
Morgan, thank you so much for having joined me today. It was an absolute joy and pleasure to speak to you. What I really love about this conversation is how it clearly reminds us that equity and challenge are not opposites. We can hold high expectations for every learner and design our classrooms so nobody is boxed in by a label like middle ability or low ability. A few things that really stand out for me is the shift from talking about ability to talking about attainment and capacity, and what that unlocks in our practice. The importance of using data deeply, not as a single reductionist score, but as a way of understanding how each child learns. And Morgan's vision of learning not as a single mountain with one peak, but as an ocean of possibility that students can explore in different depths and directions. If today's episode has sparked something for you, you can go further with Morgan's work. Her book is Gifted, The Shift to Enrichment, Challenge, and Equity. And her course, Adaptive Teaching, is available through Hachette Learning Academy, packed with practical strategies you can use in your classroom the very next day. We'll link the book and the course in the show notes, along with Morgan's social medias, so you can continue the conversation with her. And once again, a huge thank you to Hachette Learning for sponsoring the episode and for investing in professional learning that's adaptive, evidence-based, and respectful of teachers' time and expertise. We're genuinely proud to be partnering with them. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a colleague, leave a review, or tag us on social media with your reflections, especially if it's made you rethink how you talk about ability, challenge, and equity in your own context. Until next time, thanks for listening. I've been Philippa Wraithmell, and this is the EdTech Podcast.